The US government shutdown, sparked by a disagreement on Capitol Hill that's been brewing for years, is alarming those across the world relying on America's economic and political leadership. European Central Bank President Mario Draghi said there is a risk for recovery for both the US and the world. And that's echoing the concerns of the British Prime Minister. And headlines around the globe went along similar lines. For example, the French daily Le Figaro said the shutdown is a blow to the credibility of the US. In Germany, Spiegel Online called America a superpower, paralyzing itself. And one of China's major news portals pointed out that bickering US lawmakers are holding their own country to hostage. And the Australian thinks that Washington's not inspiring confidence in the world's largest economy. Rocky Anderson, a former mayor of Salt Lake City and a human rights advocate, joins me live now. So, is America's reputation really tarnished here? There's a lot of negative press we've just read out there.
Of course it's tarnished, and for very good reason. You know, you just referred to Spiegel magazine. Der Spiegel reported, although our mainstream media in this country didn't report, that Jimmy Carter several weeks ago said the United States no longer has a functioning democracy. And it could not be clearer now with this government shutdown.
Go back home.
With 87% of Americans saying that they disapprove of Congress, that we do not have a functioning democracy. We have a bunch of yahoos in Congress who are acting only for their own self-interest, to please a very narrow set of people, to keep them in office, who continue to buy their way into office. And it's all contrary, of course, to the interests of Americans throughout the country.
And it must gall so many people that you're talking about those members of Congress. They're still getting paid, aren't they? And yet those federal employees are being sent home without pay. How angry does that make people?
Well, it ought to make people angry, and it's not only the employees, some 800,000 federal employees that have no security. That not only are they not getting paid today, they don't know if they're going to get paid next week or next month. But you've also got the poor, under the Women, Infant, and Children Nutrition Program, for instance. Our county council just had to allocate a lot of money to pick up the slack for these nutrition programs for the economically disadvantaged in our community. Local governments are already having a very tough time with all sorts of budget cuts, with education being cut, other kinds of programs just to get by, and now we're having to fill in day to day for this irresponsible few people in Congress who are bringing this shutdown. And I must say, besides the few people, you've got the so-called reasonable Republicans who, if they weren't so worried about getting a primary challenge, they could just join up with the Democrats in the House and have done with this. So it really is a matter of a lot of craven, self-interested people in our Congress betraying the interests of people throughout this country.
But if this carries on, surely the penalties will be very tangible and the country will suffer. Also, of course, there's a debate about the debt ceiling. But you talk about a fundamental flaw in the system. Even a lesson being learnt in this way, if it carries on and not being resolved, could really be painful for many, many Americans. You still don't think there could be an adjustment in the system, that something could actually change in this fundamental political flaw?
What we need is a mass movement in this country. We can't depend on our elected officials to do the right thing anymore. We know that they're bought and paid for by the moneyed interests. We know the role of corrupting money in our political system. We, the people, regardless of political affiliation, need to join together and draw our line and make it clear we will never, ever support these people again. And I'm not talking about just in terms of the budget shutdown, this outrage on the American people, but the surveillance on American citizens, completely contrary to our Constitution and federal statutory law. The assassination of U.S. citizens, the continued drone bombings that have tremendous ramifications for our security. Congress is acting completely in betrayal of the American people's interest And it's time that we all stand up and say we're not going to put up with it anymore.
Well, it's really interesting to hear your thoughts on this. I just want your prediction, though, finally. How long will this deadlock go on for?
Well, I think finally there are enough sensible Republicans in the House that they're going to say they need to do the right thing finally and not be so worried about their own political futures and the primaries, having these right-wingers challenge them in their primaries, as happened here in Utah when Senator Lee beat a fairly moderate but very effective United States Senator, Bob Bennett. That was a lesson a lot of people learned, but I think it's a bad lesson. These people need to understand their highest duty is to the American people, and I think that they'll be rewarded in the long term when people see that they finally engaged in some grown-up dialogue and compromise and got the country back to where it ought to have been in the first place. And I must say, if this were a board of directors, if this were management of a corporation, these people responsible for the shutdown of our government would be fired in a heartbeat. Shareholders would no longer put up with it. I think the same goes for the voters in this country. Citizens ought to stand up and say, these people are out of there, because we know that they're only concerned about their own political futures and not the interests of this country.
Interesting to hear the words from a presidential candidate of the Justice Party, Rocky Anderson, former mayor of Salt Lake City, a lawyer and a human rights activist. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts here and your time on RT.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.